Tortoise Water, welcome. Talking about stuff. Going on about stuff.
Yeah.
Sci-fi. Interesting idea, living in a world where there's differences. Any ideas?
I think if we believe in other dimensions and that we could exist in another dimension, I would be an action hero in that other dimension. I don't know, maybe like a vampire type thing. But I prefer like a Lara Croft sort of character.
So do I. I think I would love the phone that they have implanted in their hands in Total Recall Remake. That thing just activates, glows there in your hand, put it to your glass, this thing lights up with a, suppose it's not a hologram, it's projected onto your glass, gives you a video image. I think it's an awesome phone.
Yeah.
Well, I watched the Arnold Schwarzenegger version of Total Recall. So I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about, but it was an interesting idea. Yeah.
Okay, I suppose it doesn't make you think as much as like a Matrix idea.
No, not at
That's the
all,
thing.
but it's entertaining, that's the thing. It's
Yeah.
It's the kind of movie, if you've got a hangover on a Saturday, Friday, or Sunday, you just put it on the TV and
I suppose, yeah, those are the two types you get. You get this interesting world that they create in sci-fi movies, such as The Matrix, which is like an interesting idea.
or the
But then
first
you
one.
Yeah, the first one, definitely the first one. But even if you just take parts of it into reality, like just, I don't know, kind of amplifies the idea of the power of your own mind to create your own destiny sort of thing. And how, depending on how strong that power is, you could influence other people's reality. Or you can get to pretty just cool old school movies like vampires, like The Underworld, which is flippin' cool. That kind of exist in a dimension that we all currently live in.
I can imagine a dimension existing that has, magic and vampires, werewolves. I don't see that being an impossibility. And there is the slighter, it's not as possible as having multiple dimensions, but in our own universe, there is the possibility that there are some extraordinarily strange creatures that may exist in galaxies that, due to the nature of how our universe exists, we will never actually interact with each other. So there could be a galaxy where magic, maybe not as we know it in our imaginations, but a type of magic exists.
Funny. Also, the way they evolved and everything would
Yeah.
have created some sort of other extraordinary.
Or,
being.
it would have created a divergence.
I don't know if you heard, but David Attenborough came and did a big statement. He said that if you look at Darwinian evolution and our current Earth and what has happened, we are no longer evolving. Because we no longer have survival of the fittest or anything like that. Because, we keep all the sick healthy and we have prolonged life. So he says, evolution for us has stopped. And that, he actually received massive backlash for that comment.
I can see where he would have that understanding.
I think he's 100% correct. It's like, of course.
Really?
Yeah.
I
if
think
we continue living the way we do, definitely. Because we're not keeping the fittest and the most at all.
Don't you think it's completely irrelevant if you keep someone fit and living for long? Because as soon as that person procreates,
Yeah, but the
he
chances
loses
of that
like
person
50% of his
procreating
gene
with
pool.
the chances of that person procreating with somebody that is not fit is flippin' high.
It doesn't matter whether he does that or he does not do that. Fact is, his gene pool's got like very limited life expectancy. He loses 50% of his gene pool as soon as he procreates. Whether he lives for 120 years or 50 years doesn't matter.
I'm not understanding the point.
Evolution is about genes evolving and carrying over. Every
Mm.
time you procreate, you lose 50% of it. Father and mother get together.
Yeah, but you can get the 50% of the better ones. It's like if you have two kids back in the day, you would have one that has the 50% good side of me, 50% the good side of you. Yay, strong kid. But the weak side of you, weak side of me, it'll die within the first 3 months, And then you would only have our good gene pool. At the moment, we're diluting it all with horrible genes.
as far as I understand evolution, it's not the matter of survival of the fittest.
He mentioned Darwinian.
Evolution is merely the progress of genes through a timeline. In some circumstances, in most circumstances, you could actually say it is the survival of the fittest. It is what is most likely to survive in those circumstances. But now, if there is an outside force, which happens in certain occasions, taking the snakes on that particular island that ate all the birds because there was no natural predators for snakes, rats in New Zealand that totally decimate the bird population because the birds never learn to fly. So these are just current examples of very selective genetic breeding that was based on luck as opposed to survival of the fittest. The fittest, take birds for instance. Birds are essentially made to fly, but now these birds could fly, and now they lost the ability because they were in New Zealand and there were no natural predators. That's not the fittest way to survive, because now as soon as even something as small as a mouse or a rat was introduced to the population, they were totally decimated. So it's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the luckiest. And in terms of who is the luckiest, it is the best adapted to being the luckiest, as it were. So yes, most of the time it will be the fastest, the strongest. You know, in terms of some birds, it'll be how they look with their plumage. But to me, evolution is not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the luckiest. And that gives a lot of variation into what can actually happen. And in terms of humans not evolving anymore, like you were saying with David Attenborough, I can fully understand him saying we don't evolve to actually be the fittest to survive in our environment, but because of the influences of our own making through medical technologies and all that kind of aspects, you know, having midwives and stuff like that, that just shifts how we're evolving. So we're not evolving to who's the fittest, we're evolving to a different standard. But saying that, it doesn't mean that we've stopped evolving. We have just shifted the paradigm of how we're evolving.
I need to actually hear what he said as well, because...
Yeah, this is all in the... I'm just assuming that he said the exact words that humans aren't evolving, and that was the end of his sentence. Generally, in these cases, they kind of misquoted, whereas he would have said that in a whole paragraph of information.
I'm sure it was that.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Inevitably, because there is a mixture of genes, yes, there is an evolution as such, if that's the way you want to define it, but it could be for the worst. If you want to call that evolution, fine, but then we're going backwards. And I don't know if
that's
evolution
the thing.
means... does evolution include that?
Evolution doesn't go for good or bad.
Yeah.
It evolves on how it's working.
So would you actually give some credibility to Attenborough's statement? And I think there is some credibility that you could give, because from outside effects, the machines that keep our gene pool from surviving is getting a lot more help than just from our bodies ourselves fighting off the environment. Because we are collectively fighting off the environment with all of our knowledge. However, that is just the machines that sustain our gene pool, whereas evolution just carries on by its normal mechanism all the time in the background within our gene pools as we procreate. But certainly there is a case to be made that the survival machines that house our gene pool is certainly benefiting from the modern day life. It would not be necessary for us to evolve our gene protecting machines or survival machines that much because of natural life.
Yeah, some people have the theory that we will eventually evolve into, like, if we had to think millions of years from now and the planet survived these millions of years and we survived these millions of years, that we would evolve, like, literally into, like, a brain with the power, you know, kind of like those instruments that Stephen Hawking uses, you know, where you can literally just put a little plug on it and you can operate the computer and you're not a functional being at all. You just
and to be
exist.
Honest, and to be honest, I could love that. I would. Download me into a computer right now. Sorted. Because that's the thing, I would enjoy just being able to think of everything and having all the information at my fingertips because I'm in that thing, as it were. You could, let's say it's something the size of a speaker, or whatever the size of this computer component is, you could incorporate that into a structure that can move and can have...
A robot of some sort,
Yeah.
And then that
You
brings you
wouldn't
onto
lo-
that other sci-fi movie. What was it? I can't remember the name now. Where you could line your...
Oh,
Avatar.
Avatar.
Surrogates.
Surrogate.
Avatar. Oh.
Have you seen Surrogate?
Well, I kind of know what it's about. Most people have a surrogate. They don't go out in public.
Yes.
In their real body,
Yeah. Because then what would happen then is there would be no murders because you can't really kill the host.
Yeah.
So, which is interesting concept. That was also a movie, another sci-fi movie to make you think.
It kind of ties into a comic I actually read where Superman, somehow he went to another planet. On this planet, he just found all these old people hooked up to these machines. And what it turned out to be was a simulation. All these people on this whole planet had eventually reached a technological level where they had created a simulation which was virtually like real life. So they had these robots in the real world that would provide, life support systems. But while they're in the simulation, they felt it was totally real, and all of them had godlike powers. And there are speculations that humans will reach that point as well, where we can create simulations that are real enough not to make us not be aware of the simulation. So we'll actually be stuck in a world. Not stuck. We would choose to live in this world because we would have the advantages over the real world. In this world, you would be able to fly and shoot lightning bolts or whatever it may be.
Kind of similar to the Matrix, though, idea as
Yeah.
well, then. Yeah. If you just...
I
very
can
similar to
imagine
the
a
Matrix.
good balance. Like the old saying, everything in moderation. If you're plugged in all day, I find it hard to imagine that modern medicine can sort out that body that's going to result from being plugged in all day.
It's just your brain that's going to survive.
I can imagine
ultimately we're
evolution
evolved
going
to
into hyperdrive. Can you imagine if the brain had to evolve more and we can harness more of its power, and you plug all of these brains in and they go into a simulated world? I suppose interesting things can happen. That would certainly lend a lot more credibility to telekinesis and all that kinds of stuff. If you plug your brain in and you free it from the mental constraints and physical constraints and energy constraints of the real world, you can do some seriously cool stuff.
Yeah,
But
like if
while-
you imagine literally like plugging yourself into a robot, like that is something more realistic that I can imagine.
Yeah, and then
you
you
know?
can actually bend a spoon
Yeah.
and stuff like that. But while you're plugged into the real world, while you are in the real world rather than plugged into the real world, stuff like that just don't make sense in terms of energy balances, thermodynamics, and all of that type of stuff. Free your mind, plug it in, and have some fun. While you're stuck in the real world, you got to obey the laws of physics.
So it's a robot in a virtual world then. For me to imagine that, it's quite a thing. Because the
Super.
robot will still, like, if I had to imagine me as a brain in this house currently, and I have my robot, my robot will still go out in the real world. Okay, but then I'm thinking surrogate terms here, whereas what we're actually discussing is more, you plug your brain in and the robot exists in a virtual world and interacts virtually. But like, how would we survive? What would your sustenance be?
That is a
yeah.
massive
That's the beauty
question
of it.
because it's all
It's-
about energy. You need to sustain. But if we could evolve to be more amenable to being plugged in, like you don't have to keep your limbs and your legs and your fingers and your toes and everything operational, and you just evolve to something very similar to what you had said earlier, like a brain with very little, let's say, need for exergy in terms of limbs, then
Yeah, maybe
you
we'll-
decrease your, let's say, energy requirement so much that it makes sense then.
And maybe by that stage, like if we are still inhabiting Earth, the situation on Earth will be very, very different, and perhaps there'll be super high radiation energy from some or other disaster or closeness to the sun or whatever the case is, that we could actually kind of become like plants, and any energy that we would need to gain, we could somehow process it from that, as opposed to needing to eat. And then we could do away with bowels and breathing and...
Certainly if you plugged in, you don't need a hamburger to feast your taste buds. You know, some ugly soup that circulates, you know, soup send feeds brain, soup return to some process, and then soup send again back to the brain would be more than sufficient, because we would stimulate our requirement to tantalize our taste buds in the virtual world. It would surely be a kick-ass for McDonald's, I suppose.
A sound engineer would ask you, what's the softest thing you would say? And what's the loudest thing you would say?
The softest thing I would say is a feather.